This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am here with my fellow panelists, Marcus Merrill, Evelyn Coleman, and Nikolai Avalokin. Welcome back to the podcast, folks. And we're joined here by a special guest. I'm so excited to introduce Lindsay Walker to everybody. Lindsay, would you please maybe say a few words about yourself, and then we can introduce you to the podcast?
So my name's Lindsay Walker. I'm actually a former sauce labber. I've worked at 3 companies that have the word lab in it. So sometimes they get confused. Former sauce labber. A lot of my career has been focused around explaining hard technical things to people. It might be 7th grade math. It might be calculus. It might be how to automate tests with Selenium, or at the current time, it's distributed and peer-to-peer technologies and how they can be used to build authenticity for digital media. So I'm the product lead at the Starling Lab for data integrity. It's a research lab. We're affiliated with Stanford University and the University of Southern California, and we work in the intersection of journalism and cryptography and digital media. And we also work in history and human rights investigations and a little bit of the legal space. So I help the Starling Lab team execute and implement on what we call the capture, store, verify technology for our authentication prototypes. So we work with various technology and journalists and people in human rights investigations to prototype technology and tools to accomplish different goals. I help with the product roadmap, but I also help working between the engineers who are building really cool things and discovering really cool workflows, and people who need to implement them, like our journalism fellows.
Well, welcome to the podcast. We're really excited to have you. And just for you, the podcast, we are a panel format. We like to have fun on the show. We talk about pretty much anything. We can relate it back to testing or not. And yeah, on today's episode, this is a great example of kind of how we could talk about anything. I know we want to talk about AI. We want to talk about blockchain. We want to talk about deepfakes, especially want to talk about Kate Middleton. Anything else we want to throw in there? Any takers?
Oh, wow.
Let's take it where it goes.
We were
Okay.
talking by the time this episode comes out, whatever our conspiracy theories are about Kate Middleton will probably be all proven false or correct. We don't know.
They'll all be correct.
Completely true.
ChatGPT, is it? Should we just get right into the deepfake conspiracy theories? Should we?
It might be interesting to explore the problems that AI and digital media or any sort of digital artifact, what kind of problems are coming up in the world because we have AI that is able to generate nearly anything, right? What kind of societal problems are we running into?
Yeah, well, we actually had a guest on last year who was talking about Black Mirror. There was that episode of Black Mirror, the first episode of the new season, where it was basically the person was in a show within a show. It was just endless. And it was all like AI generated versions of themselves played by other people. And I don't know, how far away are we from that of being the reality? I feel like we're probably closer than we originally thought when ChatGPT first came out and we saw the power of like LLMs, for example.
Yeah, I think it's a real threat, and it's something that we kind of deal with or talk about every day, where there's some real serious threats to society where it's really easy to steal someone's identity or pretend to be someone else. And whether that's used for, nefarious means, be it stealing the things that belong to them or just ruining their reputation and making it so that our society doesn't believe what they see or believe in people anymore. I think that's a really big problem.
You authenticate reality so that we know if we're in a reality inside of reality, like which one is the true one? Like, how do we know who's the real one, who's the doppelganger?
I have the answer to that. We'll just put the little CAPTCHA in real life, like before you talk to someone, you have to click the CAPTCHA. Are you real?
Yeah. Are you real?
Yeah, I think capture just identified bots.
Yeah, identify a bus is like hold up a picture and say, identify the traffic lights in this picture.
Even the deep fakes can hold up captures, and then which one is a real person and which one is the deep fake.
I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there trying to find like technological solutions for it, right? I'm going to make better software than the AI software that generates it. My software will be able to detect it. One thing I tend to emphasize is that I think it's still up to humans to make decisions about what's real and what something is. But it's harder now, right? Back when the first digital artifacts were made, you wrote something down on a piece of paper or you captured it with film, and there are markers on there. If you have a tablet or a piece of paper that someone created something with, a record of I own this or a record of this is my art, you can look at the paint. You can carbon date it. You can analyze what's in there. With film, you can take a look at other markers. I read a really cool article about how electrical grids around where someone was taking a picture actually used to have an effect on the film negative. So you have markers in there. And the solution that I kind of always propose is like, let's design systems that build these markers in. We don't need it for everything. We don't need these complex markers for when I take a picture of my awesome spaghetti dinner that I cooked that I'm proud of, right? That's not important. It is important when it comes to things that shape our society, journalism. These things deeply affect our society, law, when we're bringing things to court and we want things as evidence, and like history and archiving when we want to preserve something for the future.
How do the markers manifest themselves? Like a digital watermark, I guess?
Yeah, and this is the part that you might not like, but they're ledgers. You need a ledger of something. You need something that's immutable, that can't be fake. And there's different ways to do that. But another thing that I argue for too is that they're distributed and they're not in one person's hands. Blockchain just happens to do this really well. Right now, people are using it for money. And actually, when people first started making physical artifacts, that's what they used it for. They had little tokens and they pushed it into clay and it was a ledger. But then we started making artifacts for other things. The next thing that came up was funerary text. This was someone passing on their legacy and talking about it. And you go a little bit further onto the printing press, they started making things that influence society. Blockchain has some really interesting properties that make it possible to hold on to important records. You might want to prove ownership. You might want to bring something into the court of law. They have mathematical things in there like the Nakamoto coefficient and Byzantine fault tolerance. So no one person that is creating this ledger can say, I'm going to fake it and I'm going to cheat it. They're also what they're called consensus-based. Everybody kind of has to come to an agreement with it. And because they have this like monetary value to it, it's really likely that they're going to keep persisting these record that is the ledger, that is the blockchain. It's really likely that it's going to keep persisting because it's valuable, right? People are incentivized to do it. So what we do is we take digital media, we cryptographically hash it, and we hash it with things like a signature with a public-private key pair, which you might have bound to your identity. We'll take other information like metadata from a camera. We hash it, and what a hash function does is it creates a fingerprint. You can't tell what made that fingerprint, but it's immutably tied to the thing that made the fingerprint. So you can tell exactly what something is. And when you put it on a blockchain and you add a signature to it, you can tell when it existed and you can add ownership to it that people can't really contest. It's really hard to say this is faked.
That is really cool.
So the solution is blockchain.
It's a good use case, I would argue.
We know how much Marcus in particular just loves blockchain and Web3. I mean, this goes back to like one of our very first episodes, Marcus. How do you feel about that use case?
I think the first time we had this conversation, I told you, and I think I accused you all of all being young because I brought up Fox Mulder from the X-Files. Because Fox Mulder was a guy who believed in extraterrestrials. He believed in stuff. And he spent his career debunking it and proving it false. Not because he didn't believe in it, but because he did believe in it. And he's constantly on the lookout for the truth and for the right, in my case, the right use case. And since I've been hearing about blockchain, I've been hearing about use cases, and I just see him just get whacked away, just knocked down easily with very little effort. This one sounds interesting. This sounds like the kind of thing that I had been hoping for. I remain interested. I remain a little bit skeptical, but I think that I have little problems with kind of a lot of the different elements that we covered here, because a lot of those elements that seem to be sort of a core tenet are actually things that are created specifically to fix other problems in other core tenets. And also I see that the things around like the fact of it being decentralized really just means it's centralized in a slightly different way. And that the brokers are all, so we have centralized decentralization, which is now coalescing around brokers that are charged with the responsibility of keeping these things. So we have re-centralized centralization of a decentralized process, which defeats the purpose of everything. And I don't think this solves that. But none of that is really saying that this is bunk. What I'm afraid of is how many different people in the ecosystem are going to be certifying these fingerprints? And what about anything that is not certified using these fingerprints? And shouldn't it be that there is only one key to rule them all? And if we have one key to rule them all, that introduces its own huge set of problems. And therefore, we're kind of back at step one. So I wouldn't say I've got like some easy debunking say. I just think this sounds interesting. This sounds like the kind of thing I want to hear about. I'm just not sure we're there yet, and just want to keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think a lot of these people who claim to be decentralized, they're like, oh, blockchain decentralized. I'm like, who has a node with enough graphic cards to run a blockchain? Is it really, is it really decentralized? I've heard of people putting some of their core infra on AWS. I'm like, no, that's not decentralizing.
Well, I mean, they're offering GPUs now specifically for that, right? But the thing is that, so there's two different things I'm talking about, two different concepts of centralization. One is you have a decentralized network of things that are calculating the nodes, which means that there's 50,000 nodes on the network. All 50,000 have a copy of the same blockchain. So it is decentralized who's in charge of it. The problem is that the blockchain itself is a centralized ledger where my shit mingles with your shit, which mingles with everyone else's stuff. And all of the different people's transactions are going, which means that if I want to make a Bitcoin transaction, Bitcoin can only do 7 transactions per second. I have to get in line with everybody else. And if there's a fraud that's committed and the owners of that blockchain decide, I'm going to fork this thing like Ethereum did a few years ago, then I am now caught up in that fork. And I am now, all of my stuff is destroyed and forked, and it exists in 2 different places at the same time because someone didn't think of how this thing could be tricked. And the centralization of the ledger itself is defeating the purpose of my putting my trust in it.
How, in your mind, is the ledger centralized?
So my transaction is one block. You then buy something with Bitcoin that is your block, that is inextricably tied to my block in the sequence of events. Our blocks are connected to each other in a way that is completely inextricable. That is the way the math is calculated to form the blocks in the chain. So USAA has a little table that says Marcus Merrill's account, Lindsay's account, and our ledgers are separate. If my ledger gets messed up, her ledger is fine. They are decentralized. In blockchain, they are centralized in the concept of the ledger itself, which means that if something breaks with Lindsay, something breaks with Marcus. And that's the problem that I've got with pretty much the whole concept.
I think the reason we do decentralization is a little bit different. When you're talking about USAA, your bank, the thing is like, it probably won't happen. But if they wanted to say this never happened, or I don't have a record of it, or this isn't true, it can disappear. The decentralized thing about blockchain, yes, they're all tied together. They're in this hash-linked Merkle tree, right? But many, many people hold a record of it. So if one person tries to fake it, fudge it, mess with it, they can't do that. The 51% of all of the thousands of nodes have to do that and come to an agreement on it. It is interesting that it's like inextricably linked. Well, the reason they forked Ethereum isn't because something went wrong. It's because somebody stole something from somebody else. And they're like, well, we're going to rewind that ledger and start another one somewhere else.
Which defeats the entire purpose of the exercise.
I think that, to kind of get past this, and my thoughts are that it sounds like for your bank, Marcus, there is a pretty good reason that you might want to have these things differentiated between you and your cousin's bank accounts. And you want to put your trust in the bank, not to like delete your transaction and then gaslight you about it. That's really awesome if that's who you trust. I think in other instances, we might want to put our faith in the hash not getting forked. And it's all about risk management, right? Like maybe for journalism photos and for other things, there's multiple photos in the hash, there's lots of evidence in the hash. Depending on where it gets forked, maybe you can still save a lot of what's going on. In your bank transaction, maybe that's a big too much of a risk than you're willing to take. So in terms of use cases, it could be the fact that like there's never going to be one solution for everything. It's all about risk management and where does it make sense to cryptographically mark and watermark things using blockchain, and where does it make sense to just put all of your transactions on AWS and just trust that no one's going to go in there and fudge it. And I don't think everyone agrees with what level of risk they want to take with their photos versus their bank account. And having more than one solution out there I can't see that as a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not a risk thing. I think that people, and I'm not by any means a crypto maximalist, I think there's a lot of things that should be regulated by a government. But there's a lot of people who don't want things regulated by a government. Some people think what Edward Snowden did was really great, but I bet you all his US bank accounts are frozen, right? Having a system like that means like no one person gets to decide your bank accounts are frozen. At the same time, there's a lot of criminal activity going on the blockchain, so it needs some regulation and control too.
You know, the one thing that I want to argue about all this is Marcus's point that we're too young to know the X-Files.
I know who Fox Miller is.
I still don't get why you're like just assuming that we're all so young. That's like carding me for a movie right now. I just don't get that. All right, anyway, sorry. I knew I was poking the bear there by
Well, I mean,
begging Marcus to talk about blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I agree with Evelyn. Like this, but that's why I'm interested in this use case, because I think that there is a lot about risk management in this discussion. And I think that the problem that I have with crypto as it's come out is that people see other people making lots of money. They just automatically assume, okay, I can do that too. And the one area, I think I've said this several times on the podcast now, the one area where cryptocurrency has really revolutionized one particular industry is the industry of scam and fraud. And if you have the beginnings of a use case that aims to try to fix that, I mean, I'm Fox Mulder. Let's talk about it. It's great.
I think some of the things, a really good example, I'm not all about cryptocurrency as a currency. I'm about decentralized ledgers. So something that we saw over COVID is a really good example is the Black Lives Matter movement, right? People started documenting things on their phones and they made social change because of it. A big threat to that is generative AI. It's so easy to claim now and say that that is not a real video of a police officer killing someone or whatever it might be, right? We work with a lot of people who build tools, the Guardian project. They also build Onion browser. They make this really cool tool called Proof Mode, where it's a camera that you can capture metadata. It even pings the cell towers around you to not just show GPS, but where you're located. And then they hash and they sign this media. So if people are capturing, or human rights activists are capturing something that somebody is doing that is bad, that is really prone to mis and disinformation, we're building tools that make it possible to say, no, we have cryptographic proof that this is what it says it is. And it's a lot harder to debunk and be a victim of like mis and disinformation.
If only those people cared about facts.
Yeah, well, there's a few things I would love to talk about here on this particular topic since you brought us here, and I love that you brought it here. We talked about ChatGPT on this podcast. We've joked that ChatGPT is our like fifth panelist multiple times. It kind of is. And we were kind of saying, oh, well, we have a ChatGPT story, but you know what? I'd rather talk about Sora. So Sora is what terrifies me now about the future. Does the rest of the panel know about Sora? No. Okay. Oh no. Oh, I'm shocked. Nikolai doesn't know. A fun fact for everybody watching: Nikolai goes and does these talks on ChatGPT. Nikolai, who was the first person that told you about ChatGPT?
Elon Musk.
All right. You know, okay.
It was Jason Baum. Jason Baum slacked me and said, hey, Nikolai, have you seen this ChatGPT thing? This was in October of 22. You seen this ChatGPT thing? I was like, no, what is that? He's like, go check it out. I checked it out and I was like, wow, amazing. So there you go. There's your credit, Jason.
Yeah, I know. I just had to get the credit in. But of course, he had to throw the Elon Musk thing. Sora is OpenAI's new project that they're going to be coming out with that is text to video. So you put in a text prompt and it creates video. They have sample videos on the OpenAI site. You can go there right now. It's on their homepage. They've been promoting it for the past couple of weeks, more so now than they did before. And they have samples. And the sample videos are amazing. Like absolutely amazing and horrifying because they are so damn realistic and accurate. The prompt is giving you almost exactly what it's saying in complete detail, to the extent that I'm like, how is this not actually filmed by someone? That's how good this video is. I don't know how they're doing it. Maybe you all might know better than I do.
AI.
That's
AI. It's terrifying. So if they could do that, anybody could do anything. And now we could talk about Kate Middleton.
This is terrifying. I'm looking at the website right now. Y'all need to work faster. I need that. I need my own personal videos. I need every video that we do on Test Case Scenario to be cryptographically blockchain hashed, please, because this is amazing. I'm looking at these example of videos. They look real. What if somebody's out there and they're like, oh, make me a video of the Test Case Scenario hosts doing something egregious?
If someone does that, I'm going to feel so good about myself.
Yeah, you're important enough to be deepfaked.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love a deepfake. I wish someone would deepfake me.
No, they're not going to, because we have the power of blockchain on our side.
I wouldn't even say it's just blockchain. A lot of the tools we use are like good old fashioned cryptography. They've been around for a while.
We have the power of Lindsay and cryptography on our side, so I'm not scared about it.
Yeah, I think it's more of a thing where we need to build, we call it provenance, information about where something came from and what it and where it's been. We need to build provenance into our tools now, all of our tools. Have you guys heard of Devin too?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yep.
Yeah, Devin it's being big at South by. It's his first AI software engineer. The demo is mind blowing. It shows the AI making like a task list for itself. It shows it researching API docs, and then it shows it writing code. The thing that's scary to me is like, how easy is it going to be for people to hack into any system or, create systems that commit crimes that can do all sorts of things?
Isn't that the same thing though? This happens all the time. New technology comes out, someone's going to abuse it. It's going to be used for bad, right? And I think when we come out with this technology, I would hope that the people coming out with it think of some of the ways it's going to be used for bad and try to put like fail safes in. But it's hard to, just like testing, right? We'll bring it back to testing. It's impossible to test for everything, right? Sometimes you just have to test in production. So I don't know. Can't believe I just said that, but it's true.
I think actually testing is going to become more important with AI as there's AI generated software development, right? I talked with a lot of journalists this week who are scared of AI generated text. Well, I don't think any editor or publisher is going to want to put AI generated text in their newspaper. It's a great productivity tool, but you still need to play the editor's role.
Certainly for real journalists. I mean, that's the problem, is that there's like the Sam Zell owned things where they generate clickbait, and it's just clickbait for clickbait's sake to get ads on there.
One of the most popular things, like if you go to like on Twitter and Instagram, like with some of these tech Twitter and all that, it's creating an AI that will create an AI newsletter about ways to optimize AI to create newsletters.
Create a blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm lost.
I think the same thing goes for, as code gets easier to write, the more important thing is going to be humans who can write good tests to figure out, does it work or does it do what it's supposed to do?
Well, at that point, you use an AI to write the tests for the AI that's writing code.
No, I saw a thing at AWS reInvent last year where they said that there's a good chance that a lot of user interfaces are going to go away and be replaced with chat, and basically saying, you might have a user interface, but it'll come from you saying, hey, give me a form I can fill out that lets me submit something, or rather than having a flight picker with a date picker and all that stuff, you just sort of say, book me a flight to this, give me some choices. So the UI will be generated dynamically depending on the prompt and the situation. Then the question becomes, how do you test that? And I feel like that is definitely a case where Lindsay, yeah, the human tester is going to be invaluable.
I think we'd have to borrow a lot of testing practices. I think we've said this before on the podcast, but borrowing a lot of testing practices from the gaming world, where things are kind of dynamically generated, and leaning into that to formulate our new testing practices going forward for these generative UIs, which is really cool. Going back to like securing things, looking forward with all of this like AI generated code, and even some that's not. I know there's, issues out there with people borrowing maybe code that's not theirs. Is there a use case here for cryptography, also not just for pictures, but for people's code, so that when it's being borrowed by these models, we can trace back who the originators were? Is that a use case, Lindsay?
Yeah. There's actually an interesting, it's out of Austin, Texas, too. A guy named Ori Steele. I'm not endorsing, I don't even know him that well, but he makes this tool called Transmute. And what they do is a software supply chain. So they use sort of ledgers to be like, okay, where has this software been? What packages have been in it? Understanding what code is made up of and where it came from helps you understand what attacks it's vulnerable to.
Heard a similar use case around medical field. There's evidently like tens of thousands of deaths per year or something like that are caused by someone simply giving someone the wrong pills. Just that simple. Just like there's millions of people getting doses every day, and they just, drop 2 instead of 1, something like that. And there's no mechanism for controlling that. And that this similar kind of concept could be used, I think, to enforce that, some of that, the correctness and the validation.
Again, back to what we said originally, like building systems that are more AI proof. Now that it's a threat, we're going to all be scrambling. Like, well, okay, how do we redesign it? How do we prevent this problem?
Transmute stuff looks really cool.
I'm wondering how you implement all of this. I mean, I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a creator, right? I mean, imagine I am an artist, or I am writing a blog post or making a song. How do I attach these hashes to this? Do I have to go now to a new UI and upload it so that the UI can attach a hash? And for video too, and for my song, and like the amount of content generated becomes massive, right? And so it's like, is everyone now going to have to be going to these places and uploading their resources to some UIs before they can actually publish it? That becomes a pain in the butt, in my opinion.
Yeah, but how is that different than like, well, I mean, process-wise it's different, but it's kind of like the trademark, right? I mean, I feel like this is in some ways just a revision of a trademark.
It's more unquestionable, I feel like.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, a lot of what we do at the lab is we don't always, or maybe most of the time, we don't even build our own tools. We prototype tools that other people are building. So it might look like if you're creating something that you want to have your fingerprint on, you use certain cameras. TruePic is a proprietary one. They're used mostly for insurance purposes. Proof Mode is an open source one. There's literally tens of these that are developing. Leica, Canon, Sony, they're all developing cameras that are hardware signed, or at least software signed. So they sign the pictures as you take it. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, we're building systems. There are also new apps that as you upload it, it's signed and it's hashed. But really the work I think is going to happen in standards bodies like the W3C, putting in, like, being like, okay, you need to build in cryptographic signing of this for your application. And a really good example of this is Adobe is starting to build this into their Photoshop tools, into it. So it's just an inherent thing. The user doesn't see it. Right now it is very manual, right? Like open SSL, like let's create a certificate for this. But yeah, the core work here is socializing it, getting the standards approved, and getting people on board to start putting this into the systems there.
It feels like we're going to need the help of some white hat hackers to get real creative and make sure that this stuff can't be stripped out easily, that kind of thing. I hope that kind of stuff is being done, because I feel like that was kind of where the first iteration of blockchain missed, is that it was so easy to fake stuff, even though it was supposedly unfakeable. And it's like, no, people fake stuff all the time. It's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. I hope that we're thinking through those kinds of things and thinking like the bad guy to try to get ahead of what's obviously going to happen.
Now, that's a big part of standard setting, is bringing it to, like, let's bring it to DEF CON, guys.
Nicola, I think the answer is you take your music and you upload it to a thumb drive, and then you have to walk to the public ledger and upload it with your thumb drive to have it
Put the thumb drive into
I-
a Bitcoin ATM, have the Bitcoin ATM print your credit card that you then submit to get your
I have a better idea for
badge.
the music. No. We should put them on some kind of like a media that's hard that you could just have in your house and put in a player of sorts when you want to listen to it.
It could be like a square with two little circles in the middle. There could be like
Yeah,
a
like
tape that you attach
it
it to,
gets
and so
stuck
now
and
there's only one
it
tape.
gets eaten by the
I saw an article just
gotta
the other
wind
day
it.
that said floppy disks were coming, CDs were coming back for something. I tried to click on it, but it was behind a paywall, so I didn't read it. So I'm just going to give you the
I hope it
gist.
was floppy disks.
I hear good things about tape. Like, no lie, that it's the longest lasting. Just like, you know, the
tape.
magnetic tape. Let's go back to this.
Oh, I hated tape. Tape's
Yeah,
the worst.
unless it gets like tangled.
Yeah, no, I hated tape.
I have a cassette player in my truck. I kept getting my CD players kept getting stolen out of my vintage truck. And so I got fed up and decided to order the stock cassette player off of eBay and reinstall. The CD player had been in there since before I even bought it. So there was a bunch of modifications I had to like undo. And going on eBay to look for the adapters to go from CD back to cassette was a whole investigation. But you know what? My CD player my media player in my truck has not been stolen since I converted it back to cassette. So
Yeah, well,
There.
who wants that?
Because nobody can play music on
Who
it.
wants that?
We need to
That's-
stop the cassette revolution in its tracks.
My library has hard media, and ever since I discovered that, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. It's got like you could rent if you don't have like a record player, you could rent a record player and you could rent records, which is such a great idea. And you
Yeah.
could just go back and play. I'm in love with hard media. I've always been in love with hard media. The death of hard media is like the worst thing that ever happened. I need something tangible in my hand. I could read the liner notes. We talked about music and this, I don't know, MP3s will never be, they'll never replace the real thing.
I mean, honestly, it is actually better. I mean, if you're thinking in a long-term preservation sense, like digital media is very ephemeral. There's some good advantages to having grooves on a circular disc. And hey, they even put that up on the Voyager. They put a record on the Voyager because that's the way to go.
All the film that's being like reformatted, if it's the old film on like the, not digital, you can really do some amazing things to it. But like if it's shot from like after 2010, you can't really do much with it. It just is what it is.
Hard media is really tough on the environment because it's all created on plastic.
Screw the environment. I want my records.
you can make them on the X-ray.
I will play my music until the planet is dead.
Is it worse? Is it worse than blockchain for the environment?
Ask Marcus.
That is a great scientific question. Yeah.
It's a salient point. Like if you're still listening to it and the media lasts, it's not trash.
That's right.
It's not hurting the environment.
Yeah. Well, if you make it out of recycled X-ray. But this brings me back to what Marcus said about like, a bank deleting your transaction and acting like it never happened or whatever. Don't we have stories out there now of people like deleting videos that are video games that people own from their consoles and saying like, even though you bought this, you no longer have access to it.
That's
And
right.
it, like, right.
Happens a
So,
lot.
but it's the same thing. It's that like someone else is controlling your property.
Yep.
And if only that was decentralized, if only you had multiple nodes telling you that, yes, you do own Fallout or whatever video game, and you have some kind of right to it. Even if you don't still physically, you can't actually play the media. There's some ledger out there saying like Marcus Merrill owns this video game and they own it. And I don't know, there's something about owning it, even if I can't access it or play it anymore, at least knowing that it's still mine and it's still something that I paid for. That goes a long way.
Or I could just go play it on my Xbox One with my old school game and nobody owns it but me.
Mine doesn't have a slot. I had to buy the new one without the slot because it was my very first console. I didn't want to spend too much on something if I didn't know if I was going to play it.
I want the hard media. I want to ruin the earth, according to Nikolai.
Nikolai.
Always has to go there.
Hey, I'm trying to keep the community's interest above Jason's self-interest.
Thank you, Nikolai.
Thanks, Nikolai.
But this is going to be offset by the new K-Cup pods. They're getting rid of the plastic K-Cup,
God.
the new K-Cup. Yeah. So
Is it going to be digital?
Yes, the digital copy.
They're going to 3D print your coffee?
And they're going to be cryptographically signed.
Oh, gosh.
So that they know who drank which coffee.
Cryptographically signed is great.
They better not deepfake my coffee. That's all. Like, I want my coffee.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting thing to talk about too. We did a fellowship with a photojournalist and his websites are going down. He had a really cool interactive website up on the International Red Cross. And they're like, we can't afford to host this anymore. We're going down. Vice News just went down. They're taking down all their stuff. So that was an interesting journey. We tried it on a Web3 solution. It's nascent technology. It's not there, a distributed peer-to-peer system that didn't work great for everything. And then we looked at some other things. Do we put your website on GitHub Pages? Because it's free and it's cheap. Do we put it here? Do we put it here? And there are trade-offs for both. We ran into a lot of things like GitHub could decide like, I'm going to start charging for GitHub Pages. I'm not going to do this for free anymore. And that's fair.
GitHub was recently deleted some super famous open source developers' accounts. And he complained on Twitter. He said, hey, GitHub, looks like you deleted my account. I guess I have to move my code elsewhere. And only because he was famous, GitHub, I guess their VP or something stepped in and said, oh, sorry, that was a mistake. Well, we just reactivated your account.
It's interesting though, because like there's a big difference between Git and GitHub.
GitHub. Yeah.
So GitHub is how he promoted himself, but his code still lives in everyone's repository who's copied it. Git is kind of a blockchain.
Are you saying it's distributed, Marco?
It's a distributed peer-to-peer content address system.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So my problem isn't with the concept of distributed and all that stuff. My problem is with thinking that this is a brand new concept that needs to override everything. Git's been around for 30 years.
I had a presentation about this. The first peer-to-peer content addressing. Now, they're not secured. The thing that's different about blockchain is that there's a financial incentive for people to keep copies of it. These are great systems. The first content addressable storage I found was ICL in the 1960s. Then Plan 9 in Bell Labs. Like their distributed systems are not new. They're coming back into vogue. It's the cool thing now. So
everything old is new again. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for being on the episode. I feel like we could keep this conversation going. We take it to really interesting places. I had no idea we would be talking about hard media today. That got me excited. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun to be here.
Awesome. And thank you.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Nikolai. Thank you, Evelyn, as always. And thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. The most gracious thing that we could do is thank you for the time that you spend with us on a weekly basis. Time is precious, and you've decided to give us an hour of that. And we are really thankful and hope you will join in next time. Hope you had fun listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.